And we're live. We have sound. So, hello. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in on Instagram. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in on YouTube. I know we missed last week. There was some travel stuff going on, but we're back. And I am really excited for today's topic because today we're going to be talking about melatonin, not as the hormone of nighttime. We're going to be talking about melatonin as the hormone of daylight. Yeah. So when I first learned about this stuff, this kind of blew my mind and it makes so much sense. And we're going to get into some of the details of it, like obviously as we go here. So, but one of the things I'm going to start with this because this is really important. So we know we talk about um, melatonin, we talk about sunlight or light in general, right? Light primarily, I think we know has two primary functions. Now, it affects circadian rhythm, which is not what we're talking about today. If you want, you could read part 2 of my Why Sunlight is the Best Form of Medicine. It's on my newsletter. You could check it out. It's like 7,500 words. That's just part 2. Part 3 is over 8,000. So like it's going to be deep if you want to get deep and you want to go beyond what you're going to get, on Instagram. That's what this is for. It's for free. But the other part is actually mitochondrial activity and antioxidant potential. So, like someone just mentioned in the comments, yes, melatonin is a really important antioxidant. And I think we know this already because we know melatonin has a bunch of different functions, many of which are organ protective, helps neutralize free radicals, all this great stuff. But what at least I thought for years, most of my life, up until recently, was that our melatonin is triggered by night, or really an absence of light, in the pineal gland, and that's how melatonin gets distributed throughout the body. It's in the absence of light. Our eyes pick up no light, and then that stimulates part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus that creates melatonin. And then what that melatonin does is gets distributed through the bloodstream, tells everything, okay, it's nighttime. It's time to slow everything down, get ready for bed, rest, digest, repair. So that's, again, for most of my life, what I thought that most melatonin does. Now, here's the crazy thing that I learned. And this is why I think this article, like when it drops on Friday, is worthwhile checking out because of all the things that I've talked about, this might be the most applicable to everyone, and it answers a lot of questions. Now, like I just mentioned, melatonin primarily is like the hormone of nighttime. However, there are studies now fairly new within 2019, 2020 that find that most of the melatonin in the body is actually not in the pineal gland. It is created within the mitochondria of all of your cells except red blood cells because they don't have mitochondria. Over 95% of the melatonin in your body is created within mitochondria. And it's used on site, and we're going to talk about why in a second. But it's used in the mitochondria on site. This is important for multiple reasons. But the important part is what the stimulus is. So as I just talked about, like usually the stimulus for melatonin production, at least in the pineal gland in the brain, is a lack of light, no sunlight, right? So we have photoreceptors in the eyes that have nothing to do with vision. They literally just pick up light or a lack of light. And that signals to the brain, okay, make melatonin. There's no more light. It must be nighttime. The melatonin in mitochondria, what stimulates mitochondria to create melatonin, is actually sunlight, specifically more towards the near infrared spectrum, so longer wavelengths. But that is what triggers it. And I'm going to read this quote here. It's a little long, so bear with me, but this is important. So, from this article, and it's on, actually, if you go on the YouTube stream, this article, it should be the first one pinned in the description if you want to check it out. But it has now been shown that the mitochondria produce melatonin in many cells in quantities which are orders of magnitude higher than that produced in the pineal gland. This subcellular mitochondrial melatonin does not necessarily fluctuate with our circadian rhythm or release into the circulation system. We're going to come back to that. But instead has been proposed to be consumed locally in response to free radical density within each cell, in particular in response to near infrared light exposure. Now, where did we get near infrared light? It's from the sun, specifically at all times of the day. That is going to happen with sunlight exposure primarily. Now, you might be wondering, like, why? Okay, that's cool, but like, why are mitochondria producing melatonin? And in order to explain this, we need to go back to mitochondria, like what mitochondria do. And mitochondria, you've probably heard at some point, maybe you took a biology class in seventh or eighth grade or high school or whatever, and you learned that mitochondria are the powerhouses of the cell, right? And essentially what they do is create ATP. And how they create ATP, though, they go through a few different steps. So unfortunately, I can't share my screen here, but like mitochondria have, there's an outer membrane, and then within it, there's kind of this inner membrane space, they call it. And then there's an inner membrane, and then there's a matrix. They call it the mitochondrial matrix. And the mitochondrial matrix is essentially the center, if you will, of the mitochondria. And then, so we have, the matrix, the interior membrane, and then the inner membrane space. And this isn't the best visual, but bear with me here. So, and this is what creates a gradient, which allows us to create ATP. Now, what happens here, and this is where sunlight and infrared comes in and is so important. So, what happens here is we take these electrons and we get these electrons through the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And these electrons create this gradient. And usually that's through NADH. So NADH gets oxidized to NAD. The electrons kind of flow through these four different proteins that end up creating water at the end of it. And at each level, kind of like a dam, energy is given off. So these high energy electrons, they go through four steps. They give off a little energy, 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 and you ultimately end up with water. Now, what happened, and through this, at each step, you're getting protons pumped out. And this is what allows you to create ATP, is creating this difference in protons. So we have a higher pH, or sorry, a lower pH, a higher density of protons outside, which means they flow back in over time. So they're constantly being pumped out. Now, while we go down this step gradient, part of what's created are these these reactive oxygen species. So these could be superoxides, but they're free radicals essentially. And the body needs a way to create these free radicals. And a good analogy to use here would be this: is like, imagine like, you're driving a car and your car uses gas to move, right? And in the process, like your car is going to create heat. Your engine's going to create heat as part of getting the car to move. The body kind of does that inside with mitochondria, but cars have a coolant system, right? So that the car doesn't overheat. There's no, you don't end up with an explosion or something crazy going on with the engine. That doesn't happen. This is where infrared and melatonin come in. So melatonin inside the cell is created, acts as the antioxidant to neutralize these free radicals on site in the mitochondria, so that these free radicals do not cause damage down the road. I know this might sound confusing, but this is a really important distinction, because this allows the cells to stay cool. They don't overheat, right? When you have acid buildup, proton buildup, heat buildup, that is inflammation. Melatonin is the coolant to bring that down. This has nothing to do with the melatonin created in the brain to help you go to sleep. This does not actually make you sleepy because it never actually leaves the cell. This is made and used in the cell. And like I said, this is over 95% of the melatonin in your body. This is so, and by the way, this is triggered not by a lack of light, but by exposure to infrared light, particularly infrared wavelengths. So, where do we get infrared wavelengths from? It's from the sun, it's from outside. Now, why is this important in modern day environments? Well, if we look at most modern lights, we have LEDs, we have fluorescents. Those are the main lights that are used in the modern society. When you look at the wavelength of light that's emitted by LED lights, by fluorescent lights, they tend to go into the blue spectrum. They might go a little bit into they usually are in like the blue end of the spectrum. But what you'll see is they don't produce any infrared radiation, none. So why is this a problem? Your average American is spending over 22 hours per day indoors. Compare that to the late 1800s, before the invention of the incandescent bulbs, when humans, generally speaking, were outdoors 50% of the day, ballpark. So what does that mean? You're getting this vast array of light exposure. And remember, what we see, what we call visible light, is roughly 40% of the solar spectrum. In other words, we can only actually see the colors we see through sunlight are only 40% of all of the energy the sun emits. Roughly 5 to 7% is UV, and the other 55-ish percent of energy radiated from the sun is infrared. It's infrared. So when you're cutting off roughly 50% of the sun energy by being inside, by not going out into the sun, you create this imbalance, this UV infrared imbalance in the body. And what we see is we get all this blue light exposure over and over again. I have a screen on, I have a cell phone on right now. I'm indoors right now. So I am not getting the infrared that I need, but I am getting blue light exposure. Now, this is the middle of the day. This is almost 1 o'clock in the afternoon near me. So it's a little different, and that's okay. But when we're doing this all day, not getting the full wavelength, not the UV, the blue, the greens, the reds, the infrareds, all in one, which, by the way, daylight will give you, it creates an imbalance. And we make this worse in modern society when we're exposing ourselves to bright screens at night, or televisions, or phones, or tablets, or computers, or fluorescent lights, or bright LEDs at night after the sun goes down. These are lights that we are not meant to be exposed to at that time of day. And what that means is this is creating more reactive oxygen species in the body, but you're not getting the signals to create melatonin to put out the fire. So you're getting more fire, less coolant. What happens over time? You run hot, you get inflammation, and you get every other modern disease that comes along with inflammation, which is basically all of them. So, and that's diabetes, that's heart disease, that's kidney disease, that's any autoimmune disease, that's gut issues, that's thyroid issues, that's adrenals. Go down the list. They're all related to inflammation in some way or another. And remember, what are the two main causes of disease in the body? Disease, it's toxicity, toxic light exposure in this case, acidosis, which acidosis is inflammation. They are the same thing. Acid, heat, inflammation, stickiness. That's what we're getting here. I hope this isn't going over your heads, because like I feel like I have to repeat myself again with this, because this is so important, and why the more I look into this, I am getting closer to saying that like your sunlight nutrition, if you will, your exposure to sunlight is probably just as important as the food you put in your body, especially now when we are disconnecting ourselves from nature and sunlight exposure at levels never seen before. This is a big reason why skin cancers even exist, is because we are creating an environment where we are so disconnected from our normal natural environment. And this is actually even made worse. Why? Why is this made worse? Because a lot of the glass pane windows today are called low E glass. So there's been a movement towards, more energy efficiency, right? So you're seeing, especially in America, incandescent bulbs, which, by the way, will give off infrared radiation. How do you know if you're getting infrared exposure? That sensation of heat when you stand in sunlight is generally a good sign you're getting infrared exposure. So you can act, and because infrared have longer wavelengths, lower frequency, longer wavelengths, they can penetrate things like thin shirts, things of that nature. But also, infrared actually reflects off natural surfaces. So anything green, trees, leaves, grass, blue, like the ocean or water, and even red surfaces actually reflect infrared. So you don't even need to necessarily expose yourself to it. You just need to be outside to get it. Now, obviously, getting direct sun exposure is the easiest way to get it, but we are blocking a lot of that infrared exposure when we're behind these low E glass, when we're not using incandescent bulbs, which again in America are slowly being made illegal in a lot of states. So even getting incandescent bulbs nowadays is not easy if you're an American citizen. And this is becoming a much, much bigger deal. So what we're seeing is we're creating environments where we're not getting the near infrared exposure we were even 100 years ago. We're creating an imbalance so we don't get the near infrared, which triggers 95+% of the melatonin production in our body. And then we're exposing ourselves to blue light and we wonder why there's an imbalance, and we're wondering why things like skin cancer, etc., exist. It's because we're not getting outside. We're not getting the antioxidants. Literally, by the way, and this is what the antioxidant, right? These reactive oxygen species are free radicals. What do antioxidants do? Like melatonin, they they neutralize these free radicals. And this is the way we find that balance. It's when you take one away and you bring up the other, particularly when at times we don't need them, like after the sun's down and we have this blue light exposure. This is actually making us more antioxidant deficient. This literally depletes our antioxidant potential. And not only that, melatonin actually encourages or stimulates the production and mobilization of other antioxidants in the body, including glutathione. So melatonin actually sends signals to glutathione to produce it, to get it mobilized to do its job. That is why melatonin is actually the most powerful antioxidant on the planet. And it's largely stimulated by sunlight, specifically infrared. So, and it's created within every single cell that has a mitochondria on site and used on site. So when we're talking about, and I hate this cliche, but like, health starts down at the cellular level. This is actually a real thing. And this is important we're talking about infrared, because infrared actually penetrates the skin much deeper than UV. So generally speaking, shorter wavelengths do not penetrate as deep as longer ones. So higher frequency wavelengths, or sorry, higher frequency energy does not penetrate as much as low frequency. And you understand this. An easy way to explain this is with sound, right? So I'm sure maybe you've all been at like a red light, and all of a sudden, a car of teenagers pulls up next to you, and they have the window closed, and they're playing music, but you can't make out the whole song, right? But what do you hear? You hear the bass, you hear the boom, boom, boom. You hear that vibration. Those are the lower frequency sounds. You can't make out the high pitched sounds because they can't make it through the glass on their side and the glass on your window and through to your car. But you could hear the bass because those sounds, those vibrations literally penetrate, those lower frequency sounds penetrate. The same thing happens here with light. So when we have infrared light, that penetrates deeper into the body. And actually, there are studies, believe it or not, that infrared energy actually penetrates the skull. Yeah. So think about this. You can actually get infrared energy literally through your skull. And what does that do? It now you're getting infrared energy. This sends signals to cells in the cerebrospinal fluid in the brain that can actually be distributed now through the entire nervous system. Because if you remember, your central nervous system is all essentially encased, right? In the spinal cord and in the skull. So you're getting all of this light information through the eyes, but not even through the eyes, literally through the skin, through the skull into all the different tissues of your body. And if you don't believe this is true, like we actually learn in physical exam classes. So you can actually take lights and you could see into certain sinuses of the body, and that's with visible light, which has a shorter frequency, I should say, or shorter wavelength, higher frequency than infrared. So if I could see visible light through certain sinuses, depending on where I shine visible light, you better believe that infrared light can get through. So this is so fascinating, and it explains yet another reason like why nature cannot be underestimated, even though Mother Nature is underestimated literally every single day. And it is something that I think we take for granted and we don't take as seriously. And like I mentioned before, like the more that I look at this stuff, the more that that I share. And again, this full article is going to be coming out on Friday. If you haven't signed up for the Becoming Invincible newsletter, the link is in my bio. It's for free. I'm going to be coming out with new episode or new articles, whatever, every Friday. So all the science and all the stuff in much more detail is going to be there. This is just a chunk of what we're talking about. So it's going to this should be something that should be foundational and is actually going to change the way we look at the sun and science and health, because it's just foundational stuff. You can't make this up. We are our normal everyday environments are not creating a environment for health. We are not promoting health with the environment we live in, which is not the case. So we have to get better at getting away from those things. So what are some like action steps? Like are you infrared light deficient? Chances are if you're living a typical American life, yes, you are, because you're spending 22 plus hours indoors, you're in front of windows which don't allow infrared lights in. If you are outside, maybe you're driving to work, which the glass will reflect. A lot of the modern day glass reflects infrared, so you're not actually getting that infrared. Maybe you're wearing sunglasses, which are not going to be helpful either. There's so many just fundamental things that most people do. We're not taking advantage of the free medicine that is outside every single day. And when you create these imbalances, that's what creates imbalances in our internal ecosystem. And we set ourselves up more for dis-ease, for acidity, toxicity type of issues. So I hope you can see how this is becoming an issue, and like why, if we're infrared light deficient, it's going to be an issue. Now, great question. So what do I think of red light therapy? I think red light therapy like certainly has its time and place, but it's not going to replace the full spectrum of sunlight. So, and also obviously the secondary question that comes up with this is like vitamin D. Can vitamin D supplementation help with this? The answer with this is no. And this is why personally I'm not a huge fan of vitamin D supplementation. And again, I talked about this in part 2, but vitamin D, measuring vitamin D is essentially a surrogate marker for sunlight exposure. So vitamin D is a hormone. It's triggered by sunlight exposure, specifically UV exposure. And when the skin is exposed to that, that creates vitamin D, and it has the litany of functions like helping with bone formation and gut health and immune system function and lymphatic function and mineral absorption and all the things that vitamin D does. So, but what you don't get are all the other benefits that come with sunlight. And vitamin D supplementation, like, certainly does not make up for those. And what most people don't realize is that, like, you actually need balance of vitamin D with other things like magnesium and boron and some other nutrients that you can just get from eating whole foods, specifically fruits and vegetables, especially fruits and vegetables when we're talking about magnesium. But you're not going to get that in a vitamin D supplement. Never mind the fact that, again, different story, but vitamin D is not actually even a vitamin. It's a hormone, which is a whole separate problem. And I've actually seen, and there actually is some information on this. I didn't cite this in the description, but I've seen it. That if you actually supplement with vitamin D orally, when you actually go out in the sun, you become less efficient at creating it compared to someone who is not supplementing. And because it's actually hormone therapy, it's not a vitamin, it's hormone therapy. This happens all the time. And you could replace it with testosterone therapy, with different types of hormone replacement therapy for folks going through menopause or premenopause. These don't fix the problems, which are the imbalances. So this is why personally, like, I'm not a huge fan of vitamin D supplementation perfectly or specifically. Is there a time and place for it for like extreme cases? Yes, but even in those cases, you better make damn sure you're getting outside. And by the way, getting outside on a gray, overcast day is still better than nothing. And it's even better than being inside. So, like, you cannot replace these benefits from a vitamin D supplement pill. It's just not going to happen. It doesn't exist. So, that's the other one. To go back to the near infrared question. So, is infrared saunas and infrared light helpful? The answer is yes. But it's also, again, not going to be as helpful as getting the full spectrum that you're going to get from going outside in the sun. And the nice part about near infrared is near infrared wavelengths are going to be visible the entire time the sun is up. So, and really the peak of UV exposure usually happens between the hours of 10 and 2. And a good rule of thumb is if your shadow is shorter than your height, chances are you're getting quality UV exposure in those hours. Obviously, that's going to change different times of year. The general rule of thumb is between the hours of 10 and 2, depending on where you live. But that obviously changes depending on how far from the equator you actually live. So it could be longer, it could be shorter. It depends. But generally speaking, that's the rule. So they can help, but it's so much better to get the full exposure. And remember, sunlight itself, over 50% of the energy coming from the sun is actually near infrared. It's more than visible light. You actually get more near infrared energy than visible energy from the sun, which is honestly pretty cool if you think about it. So, can you use like infrared therapies and such? I would say yes. I would still say they will not replace actual sunlight. You can argue I think you can supplement them, particularly when you're particularly when you're talking about injury repair and things of that nature, but it's not going to replace getting outside, doing grounding, getting sunlight throughout the day. So those are really kind of the big things as far as near infrared, optimizing melatonin production, which happens largely during the day in the cell. And by the way, I because this is another question that I know is going to come up. The reason this melatonin does not make you tired or sleepy is because it's made in the cell and is used in the cell. It never enters the bloodstream. But that's also why supplementing with melatonin, supplemental melatonin, will not help the system at all. Because that supplemental melatonin is going to act the same way the pineal melatonin functions. which is, of course, in the absence of light, trying to get you to go to sleep. But really, the supplemental melatonin is actually pineal melatonin, not mitochondrial melatonin. This is a big deal. You're going to hear a lot more about this in the upcoming years. And I'm not gonna say I discovered this because I obviously didn't. This is mostly from some information that's come out over the last few years, but this is literally game changing. And I hope that some people will start taking this information more seriously and stop with this fear mongering of the sun, because literally every other species that lives on the surface of this planet thrives in the sun. The question we need to be asking is, why aren't humans? And it's not because the sun became more belligerent or violent, because every other species is doing all right. The ones that don't do all right are the humans, and the ones that humans mess with. So what's the common denominator there? Got to ask ourselves these questions. So, that is ultimately like what I wanted to cover today. Now, I'm going to go into way, way more detail in the article on this, because we go into easy water and mitochondria and biophotons in food. But like, there's way too much to kind of get over in this talk. But like, I really hope that like this is a helpful primer. The full article is going to come out on Friday. So if you're signed up for the Becoming Invincible newsletter, it's for free. Find the link in my bio. You could sign up. They're all on my website, insideouthealthwellness.com. I've written about 5 of them. My plan is to get one out every week. So, and it's for free. The whole point of this is to really just help you at the end of the day, and to become empowered to make better health decisions. That's what this is all about, because the only way out of this crazy world we're in is we have to be resilient enough to not need what they're selling, because what they're selling does not take this stuff into account. We can't keep going down this Newtonian physics type of approach where we chemical to death everything and not look at the things that cause problems with it. Nature literally has all the answers. And it's very clear, the further we get away from nature, the worse our health becomes. So we need to get reconnected. And that's as simple as it is. So thank you for tuning in today. I'll get this up on YouTube. I will answer some questions here on Instagram. So if you have questions, put them in the question box. I'll get to a few. Let me stop this stream. Have a good one. Really quick before I close this on YouTube. So before we go, talking about blood sugar issues, insulin resistance, which, by the way, I will cover a little bit in this article. But yes, sunlight exposure, near infrared, will help manage and is a tool you can use to help reverse insulin resistance. There's a brand new masterclass that I just dropped on this, the Insulin Resistance Reversal Masterclass. It's for free. You could sign up. The link's in my bio. Check it out. I'll see you there. YouTube, goodbye. I'm going to answer some questions on IG. So let me close this.